Hollywood's new fame reflected a major trend of the 1920s. Before that time, the United States had been largely a collection of regional cultures. Interests, tastes, and attitudes varied widely from one region to another. Most Americans simply did not know much about the rest of the country, talk with people in other regions, or even read the same news as other Americans. The 1920s changed all that. Films, nationwide news gatherings, and the new industry of radio broadcasting produced the beginnings of a national culture. Early in the decade, few American women dressed in the flapper style or smoked and drank in public. Such customs became common cultural experiences because of the growth of the mass media. The mass media are print and broadcast methods of communicating information to large numbers of people at one time. From their beginnings in the 1890s, motion pictures had been a wildly popular mass medium, and through the 1920s, audiences grew. Between 1910 and 1930, the number of theaters rose from about 5,000 to about 22,500. By 1929, when the total population was less than 125 million, the nation's theaters sold roughly 80 million tickets each week. Movie making had become the fourth largest business in the country. This growth occurred throughout the silent film era. In 1927, the success of the first sound film, or talkie, The Jazz Singer, changed the course of the movie industry. Starring vaudeville performer Al Jolson, the movie included speech, singing, music, and sound effects. Audiences loved it. As more theaters played talkies, the industry's boom continued. Some actors never made the shift from silent films to sound films. Foreign actors, for example, often faced the choice of learning English or giving up their movie careers. Other actors moved more smoothly to talkies. Greta Garbo, a glamorous star of the silent screen, retained her popularity in speaking roles despite a heavy Swedish accent. Silent screen actress Lillian Gish won renown for playing the part of the delicate heroine. She readily transferred her expressive gestures and heart-rending glances to speaking roles. Charlie Chaplin extended the silent era. Dressed in his famous tattered suit, derby hat, and cane, Chaplin had delighted American audiences since 1914 with his silent comedy. In the era of sound, Chaplin added music to his films and successfully continued his portrayal of the little tramp. During the 1920s, newspapers increased both in size and in circulation, or readership. In 1900, a hefty edition of the New York Times totaled only 14 pages. By the mid-1920s, however, newspapers, even in mid-sized American cities, often totaled more than 50 pages a day, and Sunday editions were enormous. In fact, the use of newsprint roughly doubled in the United States between 1914 and 1927. Even as newspapers grew and gained more readers, the number of independently owned newspapers fell. Many disappeared as a result of mergers. A newspaper chain, owned by an individual company, often bought up two of a city's established papers and merged them. Thus they created one newspaper with potentially twice the circulation. Between 1923 and 1927, the number of newspaper chains doubled, and the total number of newspapers they owned rose by 50%. Profits, not quality, drove most of these newspaper chains. To attract readers, especially in cities, many chains published tabloids. A tabloid is a compact newspaper that relies on large headlines, few words, and many pictures to tell a story. Tabloids in the 1920s replaced serious news with entertainment that focused on fashion, sports, and sensational stories about crimes and scandals. This content sold newspapers, as publisher William Randolph Hearst knew well. Hearst once said that he wanted his New York tabloid, the Daily Mirror, to be 90% entertainment, 10% information, and the information without boring you. During the 1920s, sales of magazines rose too. By 1929, American newspapers were buying more than 200 million copies of such popular magazines as the Saturday Evening Post, Reader's Digest, Ladies' Home Journal, and Time. These magazines provided a variety of information in a form that most people could easily digest. Advertisers, eager to reach so many potential customers, often ran full-page ads promoting their products. With the rise of newspapers and magazines as mass media, Americans began to share the same information, read about the same events, and encounter the same ideas and fashions. Thus, newspapers and magazines helped create a common popular culture. In 1920, Frank Conrad, an engineer with Westinghouse Electric Company, set up a radio transmitter in his garage in Pittsburgh. As an experiment, he began sending recorded music and baseball scores over the radio. The response was so great that Westinghouse began broadcasting programs on a regular basis. Soon the nation had its first commercial radio station, Pittsburgh's KDKA. At first, the only advertising on KDKA was the occasional mention of its sponsor, Westinghouse. Yet even that was enough to increase the sales of Westinghouse products, mainly home appliances. In the coming years, radio would become a profitable medium for advertisers. Radio enjoyed tremendous growth. By 1922, more than 500 stations were on the air, and Americans eagerly brought radios to listen to them. To reach more people, networks such as the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, linked many individual stations together. Each station in the network played the same programming, and soon much of the country was listening to the same jokes, commercials, music, sports, events, religious services, and news. Other companies imitated NBC, building networks of their own.